My brother destroyed my relationship with my parents, but years later, I was the one who saved his life in the hospital. My mother clapped hardest when my brother managed average things. That sounds petty when I say it like that, but I need you to understand the rhythm of our house, because everything that came later grew out of it. He could bring home a decent grade on a book report, and there would be dessert after dinner, my father asking follow-up questions, my mother telling neighbors on the phone like he had personally solved a national problem. I could drag home a ribbon from the state science fair after living on vending machine crackers and stress for 3 weeks, and the whole thing would land on the kitchen counter beside unopened mail, not ignored in some dramatic movie way. Worse, smoothed over. That's nice, honey. While someone was already turning to him because he had a funny story from rehearsal, or because his teacher said he had presents. I learned very early that presence and effort were not the same currency. There's this one memory I can still feel in my body, which is annoying because I've had enough actual trauma since then, and you'd think my brain would let the old stuff go. I was standing in a school gym under awful fluorescent lights, holding a second-place ribbon and a foam board that smelled like glue. My parents had promised to come after my brother's little community theater thing wrapped up. Then my mother called and said it was running late, and my father thought it would be better if they stayed because my brother got moved closer to the front, and this could be big for his confidence. Big for his confidence. I repeated that sentence to myself all the way home on the bus, like maybe I was the unreasonable one for wanting 2 adults to show up for the child who had actually earned something that weekend. That was the tone of my childhood. Not beatings, not screaming every day, not anything clean enough to point at and say there. That's abuse. It was constant rearranging. If I had a thing, his thing somehow mattered more. If I was upset, I was told not to make everything competitive. If he was upset, everyone shifted around him like furniture being dragged across hardwood. He was charming. I was sensitive. He was social. I was intense. He interrupted me at dinner and they laughed because he was quick. I stopped talking halfway through stories because what was the point? There is something humiliating about realizing, as a kid, that your family enjoys a louder version of life than the one you naturally are. And yes, before you start defending teenage boys in your head, he knew. I don't think he sat in his room twirling a mustache like a cartoon villain. It was smaller and uglier than that. He knew where the light was and kept stepping into it. He knew if he made a face when I was getting attention, my mother would ask him what was wrong. He knew if I got praised, he could toss out one self-deprecating little comment and suddenly everybody would be reassuring him instead. He was good at making his need feel urgent. I got good at being low maintenance because apparently that was the only version of me that was considered lovable. By the time I was old enough to leave, I, Caroline, had this embarrassing little fantasy that distance would fix all of it. Not because they'd miss me exactly, but because being away from my brother might let them see me without his reflection over everything. I didn't expect miracles. I just wanted to walk into a room and not feel like I had already lost some invisible contest before anyone spoke. When I got into medical school out of state, my father stared at the acceptance letter like it had arrived by accident. That was the first time I ever saw surprise on his face that wasn't disappointment wearing a nicer shirt. He said, "Well, maybe you really are going to do something serious," which is such a bleak little sentence to treasure, but I did. I took it upstairs and sat on my bed with that paper in my lap like it was proof I hadn't imagined my own brain. My brother hugged me that night. Even now, that detail makes me laugh in a gross, bitter way because if somebody wrote this into a show, I'd roll my eyes and say the foreshadowing was too obvious. But at the time, I was starving for family warmth, so I took it. He asked practical questions over the next few weeks. What classes started first? Whether the professors were intense? How hard the grading was? Did people drop out a lot? Did the school help with housing? He called more during my first semester than he had in the previous 3 years combined. I told myself it meant we were growing up. I told myself maybe adulthood would do what childhood never did and turn us into actual siblings. He had this way of sounding casual while gathering information, like he was leaning in without looking like he was leaning in. He'd ask how I was doing, then circle back to whether I thought I could keep up. He'd joke that I'd always been the book one, then ask if the other students were smarter than I expected. I answered honestly because honesty felt like a relief. The work was brutal. I loved it anyway. I was exhausted, anxious, and more alive than I had ever been. For once, effort translated directly into results. There were no family dynamics in a lab, no childhood script in an anatomy exam. You either knew it or you didn't. I breathed differently there. The weird thing is my parents almost acted proud, but only in a cautious, provisional way, like they were renting pride and didn't want to sign a long lease. My mother started mentioning me to people from church. My father asked once about a white coat ceremony and then forgot to call the day it happened. I still took the scraps. Don't judge me. Or do, honestly. I judged that version of me all the time. She was so eager to believe that one major accomplishment could rewrite a whole family system. It can't. It just gives everybody new material. My best friend from school became my real anchor during those years. He was the person I texted when I bombed a practice quiz and the person who made me eat something with actual nutrients instead of surviving on stale crackers and caffeine. He could make me laugh when I was one panic attack away from crying in a stairwell. He also knew exactly how my family worked, because he'd sat through enough phone calls with me to hear the before and after version. Me bright for 5 minutes because somebody finally sounded warm, then me quiet because of the little dig buried in the conversation. He told me once, "They don't get to decide what your life means just because they taught you your address." I wrote that down in the back of a notebook. If you want the clean version, this is where the story should have turned into a redemption arc. Daughter leaves home, proves herself, family slowly respects her, brother grows up, everybody learns. Cute. Neat. Not what happened. What actually happened is that the first time my life became complicated in a way that required trust. I handed my brother a loaded weapon and thanked him for listening. My 3rd year got split open by illness. My best friend started feeling run down in a way that didn't match the schedule we were keeping. And at first, we both treated it like stress because that's what students do when their bodies start waving red flags. We romanticize our own burnout right up until a doctor says something that changes the air in the room. His diagnosis came fast after that. Advanced cancer. No real path toward a cure. I remember the way he looked at the wall behind the doctor instead of at me, like maybe if he kept his eyes on one fixed point, the whole thing would stay theoretical. He didn't have family nearby. His parents were gone. The extended relatives he did have were the kind who posted inspirational things online and vanished when life got expensive or inconvenient. He had me. That's not a poetic statement. It was paperwork, rides, medication schedules, insurance calls, sleeping upright in awful chairs, and learning how to make your face calm when somebody you love is asking a question you can't answer without lying. The school approved a temporary leave once I provided the documents. Everything was official, structured, boring even on paper. A pause, not a collapse. I put all of it in a folder because apparently some part of me still believed evidence mattered. Before I talked to my parents, I called my brother. That decision still makes me want to sit down on the floor and stare at a wall. I called because I was tired and scared, and because he had been so attentive lately that I let myself believe maybe he had become safe. I explained the diagnosis. I explained the leave. I explained that I was helping with palliative care and didn't know how to tell our parents in a way that wouldn't get twisted into some lecture about priorities. He listened quietly. He even sounded gentle. He said, "Don't tell them until you're ready." I won't say anything. You know when somebody says exactly the thing you need and your whole body unclenches? That was what I felt. Relief so stupid it makes me want to shake my younger self by the shoulders. I thanked him. I cried after we hung up because I thought, wow, maybe this is what having a brother is supposed to feel like. Supportive, steady, not a competition, not a trap. For a few days, I lived inside that mistake. I took my friend to appointments, sat with him while he pretended dark humor could outsmart mortality, and kept my phone face down when my family group thread lit up with random nonsense. Recipes. A picture of my parents' dog. My mother complaining about the weather. Normal things happening in a normal house I had apparently never really belonged to. Then my father called. I knew from the first hello that something had shifted. His voice had that clipped coldness people use when they want you to know they've already decided who you are before the conversation starts. He said my brother had told them I'd dropped out. Not taken leave. Dropped out. That I was throwing away this expensive opportunity because I got emotionally attached to a friend and couldn't handle pressure. I actually laughed at first because it sounded too absurd to be real. Then I started explaining. Documents, formal leave, hospital records, names of administrators who could confirm everything. My father cut me off and said he was done listening to stories. That was the moment I understood something ugly about my family. Betrayal wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how easy they made it for him. I called back twice after he hung up, then 3 more times after that because panic makes you annoying. Straight to voicemail. I texted my mother. No answer. I texted my father that I could forward every document, every email, every official form. Silence. By the end of the night, both of them had blocked me. I found that out in the humiliating modern way, where your message bubbles suddenly sit there looking dead and your calls stop pretending they might go through. I kept checking anyway, because dignity is not always available at the exact moment you need it. A week later, I mailed a letter. Long. Organized. Calm in a way I absolutely was not. I included copies of the leave approval and contact information for the school. I explained my friend's condition in broad terms because it felt wrong to put his private suffering on display, but apparently I was still willing to use my life like evidence in a case nobody wanted to hear. The envelope came back unopened with my mother's handwriting on the front like she was rejecting junk mail. I stood in the apartment lobby holding that thing and felt something go hard inside me. I tried one more time after that. Another letter months later. Shorter, less explanatory, more human. I told them I missed them, and that whether or not they believed me, I was telling the truth. That one disappeared. No reply. No return. Just vanished into whatever quiet graveyard people send inconvenient love to when they want the moral comfort of not having said anything cruel out loud. Meanwhile, my friend was dying in stages that felt both endless and rude. There is no elegant way to watch somebody you love disappear by fractions. People say things like passing and journey because the direct language is ugly and unfair. What happened was his body failed him, little by little. And I kept showing up because there was nothing else to do. He tried to make it easier for me, which was a ridiculous thing for the terminally ill person to attempt. But that was him. He apologized for needing help. He apologized for bad days. He apologized for making me miss school, as if the real problem in the room was scheduling. The night he died, I was the only person there. That sentence still lands in me like a dropped pan. One monitor flattened into that terrible steady tone and the room changed shape. Not literally, obviously, but you know what I mean. Suddenly all the objects looked too sharp. The chair, the blanket, the cup with the bent straw. I held his hand after there was no reason to keep holding it because letting go felt like agreeing to something I had not agreed to. After the funeral, I found a note tucked inside one of my anatomy books. He must have slipped it there earlier, back when he still had energy for tiny ambushes of kindness. It said, "Finish the degree. Don't let anybody else decide how much your life counts." I sat on my floor and cried so hard I scared myself. Then I got up and went back. That whole period broke something open in me, but not in a heroic way. I didn't emerge transformed and wise. I became functional, extremely, unnervingly functional. I studied. I returned to school. I sent the occasional update to my parents because some humiliating piece of me still wanted to leave a trail back to me if they ever decided to care. Some letters came back unopened. Some vanished. I graduated without them. I matched into residency without them. I learned how to keep moving while a whole part of my life remained frozen behind me like a locked room in a house you still have to live in. Residency suited me in the sickest possible way. The hours were brutal. The hierarchy was annoying, and I spent a concerning amount of time inhaling coffee while speedwalking under fluorescent lights. But at least the rules were honest. If a patient was crashing, you moved. If you didn't know something, you learned it. If you made a mistake, there were consequences that had names and timestamps. Compare that to family, where people can delete you emotionally and still tell themselves they were protecting the truth. I ended up in emergency medicine because apparently my nervous system likes structured chaos. Trauma bays, overnight shifts. Decisions made fast with enough information to keep you humble. I got good at staying steady while other people panicked. That sounds impressive until I admit it was partly because I had already spent years practicing emotional compartmentalization at an elite level. Give me hemorrhage over mixed family messaging any day. At least blood loss has protocols. I met my husband during a training course. He was not the loudest person in the room, which helped. I didn't have the energy for charm by then. Charm reminded me of my brother. My husband was funny in this dry, quiet way that snuck up on you. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk. When I told him pieces of my family history, he didn't rush to solve it or say all the fake, comforting things people say when they think forgiveness is a personality trait. He just said, "That sounds lonely." And honestly, that nearly got me more than the flirting did. I fell in love slowly, which was the only way I was capable of doing it. We got married in a simple ceremony with a borrowed arch, folding chairs, and a cake that leaned a little to one side. I mailed my parents an invitation, even though I already knew what would happen. It came back unopened. Of course it did. I had almost started to treat returned envelopes like weather. Not personal, just recurring. When our daughter was born, I sent one photo. Tiny hat, swollen face, ridiculous perfection. I tucked a short note behind it. "You have a granddaughter. She's healthy. I wanted you to know." That envelope came back too, still sealed. I wish I could say that was the moment I finally gave up. But grief is clingy and hope is embarrassing. I didn't keep reaching in any dramatic way after that. I just kept carrying the fact of them like a pebble in my shoe, small enough to ignore on busy days. Impossible to forget completely. Outwardly, I built a good life. Good marriage, good work. Mortgage, daycare logistics, arguments about whose turn it was to buy groceries. The kind of life ordinary people fight hard for and then complain about, because ordinary stress is still stress. I wasn't sitting around waiting for reconciliation. I was living. But there was always this scar tissue under everything. Holidays were the worst. Not because I wanted to recreate the old version of family. God, no. More because every holiday is basically a national ad campaign for belonging. And if your own history with belonging is weird, it can catch you sideways while you're trying to peel potatoes. Years passed. My brother became a person I referred to only as my brother. Like a role in a story I used to tell more often. My parents became ghosts with mailing addresses. I became the woman who could intubate somebody with steady hands and then cry in a parking garage because my daughter made a paper family tree at school and asked why her branch had fewer names. So when the call came in one night and I saw his name on the trauma board, it didn't feel cinematic. It felt rude, like the universe barging into a room I had finally managed to keep orderly. The page went off a little after midnight. Motor vehicle crash, incoming, abdominal trauma, unstable. Just another terrible night in a job built on terrible nights. I was halfway through swallowing terrible break room coffee when I grabbed the intake sheet. Then I saw the name and stopped so hard one of the nurses asked if I was okay. It was my brother. There was maybe 1 second, 2 at most, where the human part of me and the doctor part of me stood facing each other like strangers in a hallway. I could have recused myself, in theory. In a slower situation, in a more convenient universe, maybe that would have been the clean move, but he was actively bleeding, and there is no noble speech you can give a hemorrhage about boundaries while you wait for another attending to come downstairs. So I said, "I've got it," and the room moved. He came in gray, dazed, and split open by impact in ways I won't describe. Because this is not that kind of story, and honestly, I hate when people turn emergencies into entertainment. The short version is that he was in bad shape. The longer version is that my hands knew what to do before my brain had decided how to feel. Orders, pressure, imaging, blood, surgery prep, the usual controlled frenzy. Everybody around me saw a physician handling a crisis. Nobody saw the child version of me standing back at that science fair with a ribbon in her hand thinking, Of course I would be the one saving him. The resuscitation and handoff felt endless. There was a stretch where his pressure dropped hard enough to change the pitch of the room. You know that feeling when everybody gets quieter and faster at the same time? That. We stabilized him, got him through the worst of it, and transferred him to the surgical team. I peeled off my gloves and realized my hands were shaking after the fact, which is always offensive somehow. Like, thank you, body. Wonderful timing. I walked to the water cooler outside recovery because I needed 1 minute to not be looked at. The water was lukewarm and tasted faintly like plastic. Through the glass of the waiting area, I saw my parents for the first time in years. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, which made me instantly mad because grief and age do not get to soften what people did. My father still held himself like certainty was a virtue. He had one hand on the back of a chair, staring at the hallway doors the way family members do when they're willing a professional stranger to emerge with better news than they deserve. They had no idea I had just helped save their favorite child in the trauma bay. I stood there longer than I should have. Not because I was deciding whether to tell them. Hospital policy and basic ethics were going to tell them. It was more that I was trying to line up the versions of myself required for the next few minutes. The doctor who owed them clean information. The daughter they erased. The woman who had not heard either of them say her name in years. I inhaled, exhaled, straightened my scrub top like that could make me less wrecked, and went in. My mother looked up first. Her expression changed in layers so fast it was almost ugly. Relief because someone had come out. Confusion because she knew my face before she accepted it. Then recognition. Then something like fear. My father stood when he understood what he was seeing, and for a split second he looked almost embarrassed, which I have to admit gave me a tiny, nasty pulse of satisfaction. So I introduced myself by my full name and title and gave them the update like they were any other family in any other waiting room. Stable for now. Internal injuries controlled. Critical, but alive. Questions I could answer. Details I couldn't promise yet. My mother whispered my name like she was trying it out after years of not using it. I kept talking. Because if I had stopped, if I had let the personal part in too soon, I might have either cried or said something that would have gotten me written up. My father said daughter in this rough, strained voice that might have wrecked me once. That night, it mostly made me tired. My mother tried to stand and almost knocked into the chair behind her. She started apologizing before she had even formed a full sentence, which irritated me on a level I can't fully explain. Maybe because panic apologies are often more about the speaker than the person they hurt? Maybe because she hadn't earned the right to leap straight to emotion after skipping all the years in between. I kept it clinical. I told them a nurse would come get them when visitation was allowed. I told them the next several hours mattered. I told them what not to expect. I did not answer the personal questions buried inside their faces. When my mother said, "We didn't know," I cut in so fast it surprised even me. I said that was not relevant to his current medical status and that I needed to get back to work. Cold. I know. I hear it too. But there was this strange relief in having a role that limited what I had to give. The hospital gave me structure they had never given me as a family. In those walls, I did not owe them comfort. I owed them competence. I thought that would be the end of it for the night. It wasn't. By morning, I checked his chart before my shift and got updates from the trauma team while my parents hovered at the edge of the room, trying not to look like people with a secret. He was barely conscious then. Out of it. Pale. Human in a way I had never really allowed him to be in my head. Not a symbol, not the favored child, just a hurting man whose body had been abruptly reminded of mortality. That made me angry too, weirdly enough. I didn't want his humanity arriving now like some late apology from the universe. Outside the room, my father intercepted me. He asked about prognosis first, sensible enough. I answered. Then he started into this stumbling explanation about stories my brother had told over the years, and how they had believed him, and how now maybe they had been misled. Maybe. That word nearly made me laugh in his face. I told him there was no maybe. They had chosen not to verify anything because the lie was convenient. He went red around the ears. Then he said the quiet part out loud without meaning to. He said my brother had always seemed so reliable, like I was supposed to understand, like trust had simply landed there naturally, and he had been following probability. The sentence sat between us, naked and disgusting. What he meant was that I had never seemed reliable enough to deserve a second look. He realized that almost immediately. I watched him realize it. That's the kind of thing people call satisfying in revenge fantasies. In real life, it mostly felt bleak. My mother tried again later with softer energy, which used to be her specialty. Not overt cruelty, just gentle avoidance. She cried in the hallway and said she had thought there must be some misunderstanding, but then so much time had passed and she didn't know how to fix it. I asked why she hadn't opened the letters. She started crying harder, which was not an answer. I walked away because I could feel myself getting mean in a way that would not help me professionally or personally. I thought the hardest part would be seeing my parents. It turned out the hardest part was when my brother woke up enough to ask for me by name. I almost said no when the nurse told me. Not because I was scared of him exactly, though maybe I was. More because I had spent so many years having conversations with an imaginary version of my brother in my head that the real one felt inconvenient. In those imaginary conversations, I was always devastatingly articulate. Measured but lethal. Calm, impossible to dismiss. In reality, I was running on too little sleep, too much adrenaline, and the kind of old hurt that can make you sound 14, no matter how old you actually are. He looked wrecked when I went in. Again, not graphically, just unmistakably mortal. Tubes, monitors, hospital pallor, the whole dignity-stripping package illness and injury hand out for free. He tried to sit up a little when he saw me and winced. Some ugly part of me thought, good. He thanked me first. Very softly. I said, it was my shift, which was technically true and emotionally rude. He flinched anyway. Then there was this long silence where you could feel him trying to decide how much honesty his body could survive. He said he had always known I was the smarter one. I wish you could have heard my internal reaction, truly, because if he had not been attached to monitors, I might have laughed. Not joyful laughter. The kind that shows up when something is so offensive your body rejects it as language. He kept talking. He said when I got into medical school, our father looked at me differently, and for the first time my brother felt replaceable. Not unloved exactly, just less central. He said it made him panic. There it was. Not some grand motive, not inheritance or money or one dramatic outburst. Just panic. A favored child feeling the spotlight shift a few inches and deciding to break the bulb. He tried to frame it like one lie that got out of hand. I didn't let him. I asked whether telling our parents I had dropped out was supposed to help me. Whether letting them cut me off for years was an accident too. He cried then, which I hated. I hated it because I could tell it was real. And real emotion is annoying when you want somebody to stay flat enough to despise cleanly. He said he hadn't expected them to go that far. He said after a while he didn't know how to undo it without exposing himself as the reason. He said every year that passed made it worse. I told him the invitations had come back unopened. The wedding invite, the baby photo, the letters. I watched him process that like he genuinely had not understood the scale of what he'd done. He had built some story where I had probably moved on, probably found new people, probably stopped caring. Which, okay, I did find new people. I built a life. But that is not the same as not being damaged. He asked if I hated him. It was such a childish question that I almost got angry all over again. Hate is too tidy. I told him I thought about him less than he probably deserved and more than I wanted. I told him there are injuries that stop throbbing but still change how you walk. He cried harder, which did nothing useful for either of us. Before I left, he said he was sorry. Not in a dramatic speech, just those words, flat and scared. I stood there with my hand on the door and wished I felt larger than I did. I wished I felt beyond him, but mostly I felt tired, because apologies arrive after the damage like receipts for things you never wanted to buy. I didn't forgive him. I didn't scream. I didn't tell him he was dead to me. I just left the room and went to chart, which is maybe the most adult and depressing sentence I've ever written. My parents asked to talk outside the hospital after that, and I kept saying no until no started to sound childish even to me. Not wrong, just repetitive. So I agreed to 10 minutes in the parking garage between shifts, which is exactly as romantic as it sounds. Concrete, car alarms in the distance, stale air, and me holding a paper cup of coffee like emotional support. My mother brought a box. It was one of those ordinary storage boxes from an office supply store, the kind you use for tax papers or stuff you can't face sorting. She set it on the hood of their car and opened it like she was handling explosives. Inside were my letters, every single one they had not opened. Wedding invitation, graduation notice, a letter about my first week of residency, the photo of our daughter still tucked in its envelope. My mother started crying before I touched anything. Apparently my mother had kept them all. She said she told herself she was saving them for when things calmed down, which is the kind of sentence that can only exist inside a house built on denial. Years had passed. Things had not calmed down. She had just built a museum of avoidance in a closet. The night before, after seeing me at the hospital and realizing how real everything was, she had opened the box and read all of it with my father sitting beside her. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. There was something almost obscene about watching them cry over versions of me they had stored unopened for years. My father picked up one of the letters and said he read the one where I described my first day of residency 3 times. He said I sounded excited and scared and proud. He said he should have known. Should have. There is no phrase I hate more in family repair conversations. It always sounds like people applying wisdom retroactively so they can feel honest without having to revisit what they actually did. So I told them what their choice cost in simple language, not a speech, just facts. My best friend died and I had nobody from home to call. I graduated with no family there. I married a good man they refused to meet. I had a daughter they refused to know existed. Every holiday I had to decide whether to explain them or erase them in conversation. Every time someone asked about my parents, I had to choose between the short answer and the humiliating one. My father tried to touch my arm. I stepped back without thinking. That hurt him. I saw it. And yes, part of me thought good again, which I'm aware is not saintly. I am not writing you a saint. I'm writing me. Then they asked the question I knew was coming. What could they do now? Nothing, I said. I meant it literally. There was no task list, no apology script, no overdue grand gesture that could turn lost years into recoverable property. My mother started saying they could try. They could come visit. They could do whatever I needed. My father said people make mistakes. That one almost took me out. People make mistakes when they forget birthdays or say the wrong thing at dinner. This was a sustained decision aided by laziness, favoritism, and cowardice. I told him that. Not politely. They stood there looking stunned, as if honest language from me was somehow harsher than the silence they had chosen from themselves. Eventually, my mother asked if they could at least know our daughter's name. I gave them her name and age because withholding basic facts from them started to feel theatrical, and I was too tired for theater. But I made it clear that information was not access. Access was a separate question, one I was not answering in a parking garage while my coffee went cold. Then I left. I got in my car and shook so hard I had to sit there with both hands on the wheel until the tremor passed. Rage looks powerful from the outside. On the inside, it's often just grief with better posture. For a while after that, my life split into absurd little lanes. In one lane, I was still working shifts, still arguing with billing, still trying to remember whether our daughter needed cupcakes for some school thing. In the other lane, my family had suddenly become active again, like a dormant infection flaring up when my schedule was already bad enough. My mother started sending short messages through email because I had not unblocked her number, and apparently she understood that surprise calls were a terrible idea. The messages were careful in that overly careful way people get when they know they've lost all natural right to your time. Good morning. Thinking of you. I hope your shift was okay. Once she sent a recipe I used to like, then apologized in the next email because maybe that was intrusive. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't made me want to cry in a grocery store aisle. My father took a different route. He wrote exactly 2 messages in the first month, and both sounded like business correspondence drafted by a man who had only recently discovered regret, but was trying to behave professionally around it. He said he was in therapy. He said he wanted to understand why he had accepted my brother's version so quickly. He said he knew he had favored my brother, but had not understood the extent of the damage until it was impossible not to see. That phrasing bothered me. Had not understood. As if understanding had been hidden from him instead of simply inconvenient. My brother also wrote longer messages, rambling ones. He apologized for specifics, which I will say is better than apologizing for whatever happened, like some people do when they want absolution without detail. He mentioned the calls he made to the school, pretending concern. The way he described me to our parents as overwhelmed, unstable, dramatic. He admitted he had always known exactly which words would trigger my father's contempt and my mother's worry. Reading that made me physically cold. There is something chilling about seeing strategy laid out after years of calling it family tension. And still, I didn't know what to do. That was the part I found most annoying. I wanted clarity. I wanted either a clean no forever or a clean path toward something better. Instead, I had mess. Some days I thought, absolutely not. They don't get me back because they got scared when my brother almost died. Other days I'd watch our daughter coloring at the kitchen table and wonder whether I was denying her something I would have killed for at her age, even if the people offering it had awful timing and worse history. My husband stayed maddeningly reasonable through all of it. He asked questions I didn't want but probably needed. If they never changed, would I regret keeping the door shut? If they did change, what kind of contact would feel safe? Was I protecting our daughter? Or was I using her as a shield because I still felt 12 around them? None of this was accusatory, which honestly made it harder. I couldn't even get righteously offended. At one point, I snapped at him for being calm. He was standing at the sink rinsing dishes, and I accused him of treating my life like a therapy workbook. He set the plate down, looked at me, and said, "No, I'm treating it like it matters. You get to be angry, but you still have to choose on purpose." Then I cried into a dish towel like the stable adult I pretend to be in public. My parents started family therapy without me. That was their idea, not mine. My father emailed to say they weren't doing it to impress me, but because they should have done something years ago. I rolled my eyes so hard reading that I nearly sprained something, but I also noticed he didn't ask for praise. He just told me, which, weirdly, landed better. Time passed. My brother got discharged. He moved into a smaller apartment. Then, against my own expectations, I agreed to one therapy session with my parents. 1. Public office building, mediocre coffee, no guarantee beyond that hour. I said yes because curiosity and pain are cousins, and apparently both of them still lived in me. The therapist was a woman with kind eyes and the ruthless patience of somebody who has heard every version of family self-deception before lunch. She asked us to start with facts, which I appreciated because feelings can be manipulated by whoever cries first. My father spoke first. He said he had trusted my brother because my brother had always seemed straightforward, while I had often seemed guarded and emotional. There it was again. Same hierarchy, just in softer language. My body went hot immediately. The therapist noticed and asked him what he meant by emotional. He fumbled. Independent, reactive, hard to read. In other words, I did not perform my inner life in ways that flattered him. My mother talked next. She cried, obviously. I'm not being cruel. She did cry. She said she had sensed something about the story didn't add up when my brother first told it. She said she remembered thinking the leave paperwork explanation sounded plausible. The therapist asked what she did with that doubt. My mother stared at her lap for so long the room turned strange. Finally, she said she did nothing. My father actually turned to look at her like he had never heard that before. Maybe he hadn't. Apparently, marriage remains a thrilling landscape of withheld information even after decades, who knew? The therapist asked why she did nothing. My mother said because if she checked and I was telling the truth, then she would have to confront not just that moment, but years of how things had always worked in our house. She would have to admit she knew my brother absorbed more protection and attention. She would have to admit I got translated into the strong one whenever it was convenient to neglect me. She said it felt easier to believe the version where I had chosen distance. That one landed, not because it was new exactly. I had known some version of it for years. But hearing her say out loud that she preferred the story where I was the problem because the real story would indict her, that hit differently. The therapist turned to me and asked how it felt hearing that. I said, like being gaslit by a person who finally got bored and read the script aloud. The therapist almost smiled. My father definitely did not. He started apologizing then, but what mattered more was that he was shaken in a real way. Not performatively devastated, just disoriented. He kept asking my mother why she had not said any of this before. I wanted to scream that this was exactly the issue. Him acting like he had merely been uninformed when the truth had been sitting in the house with him all along. Instead, I said what I actually needed to say. I told both of them that the years after they cut me off were not a pause. They were my life. My friend's death happened in those years. My marriage happened in those years. My daughter's birth happened in those years. They weren't missing a chapter. They missed the actual book. Nobody had a neat response to that, which was honestly the best part of the session. When it ended, my mother asked if we could do another one. I said maybe. That maybe was not kindness. It was accuracy. Outside in the parking lot, my father said he didn't know if I would ever believe him, but he was starting to understand how much of our family depended on me accepting less, so everyone else could feel comfortable. That was probably the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I told him understanding was late. He said he knew. And because real life is rude, I went from that conversation straight to work, where a man had sliced his hand trying to open a frozen pizza and wanted to argue with me about stitches. Nothing restores perspective like ordinary stupidity after emotional devastation. I stood there with gloves on, telling him not to flex his fingers, thinking, wow, my entire family just collapsed in a therapy office, and now I'm discussing wound care with a grown man who called his own blood dramatic. America really runs on whiplash. The contact that followed was uneven, which felt more honest than instant intimacy would have. Sometimes my mother emailed twice in a week. Sometimes I ignored her for 10 days because even seeing her name felt like being tapped on a bruise. My father stayed sparing, which I preferred. My brother wrote once a month and never asked for replies. That was probably wise. I still didn't know what to do with him beyond acknowledging he existed and had finally stopped hiding behind passive language. The bigger issue became our daughter. My parents kept not quite asking, and I kept not quite answering. She was old enough to notice when grown-ups got weird around certain topics. She'd ask casual questions while drawing at the table. Did I have a mommy too? Why doesn't she come to my school things? Do I have more family? Or just the fun uncle from next door who lends us his ladder? Kids do this thing where they stumble right onto the loaded landmine and then look up at you with a crayon in their hand. I did not want to feed her a fairy tale. I also did not want to dump adult betrayal onto a child who still thought losing a shoe at recess counted as a catastrophe. So I told her a simple version. I said there were some family members who had made hurtful choices a long time ago, and I was still deciding what was safe. She accepted that in the way children accept all kinds of things they will probably revisit later with better questions. My husband and I argued about timing more than substance, not screaming fights, more like exhausted kitchen debates while somebody's lunchbox dried on the counter. He thought a brief public meeting might give us information without committing to anything bigger. I thought any meeting would be interpreted as forgiveness because that's what families like mine do. They treat access as absolution. He agreed that was a real risk. He also pointed out that refusing all contact forever, because they might misread a boundary, was still letting their potential reactions manage my choices. Annoying. Correct, but annoying. So I set terms. Public place. Short visit. No gifts, because I did not need them buying emotional symbolism from a toy aisle. No surprise talk about the past in front of our daughter. No hugging unless she initiated it, which she would not because she treats new adults like suspicious camp counselors for at least 30 minutes. My mother agreed so fast it made me suspicious. My father agreed more carefully, which weirdly reassured me. We met at a little coffee shop near a park on a Saturday afternoon. I got there early because of course I did. I had planned my exit routes, my parking, the exact length of time I was willing to stay before fake smiling became medically unsafe. My daughter was wearing striped leggings and carrying a stuffed rabbit missing one eye, because apparently children only truly love items once they are mildly disfigured. My parents walked in and looked older than they had even a few weeks earlier. Or maybe they just looked like people without the shield of denial. My mother's face crumpled the second she saw our daughter. I nearly ended the whole thing right there. But she caught herself, sat down, and did not reach out. Points for effort. The conversation was awkward in the most ordinary way. Our daughter showed them a drawing from school. My father asked what books she liked. My mother complimented her shoes like a nervous babysitter. Nobody said the word granddaughter at first, which I noticed. There were these little silences where you could feel everyone avoiding the crater in the middle of the table. We stayed 40 minutes. Not terrible. Not healing. Just real. When we left, my mother thanked me like I had given her oxygen. I nodded and said we'd be in touch if and when we were ready. Then I buckled our daughter into the car seat with shaking hands and sat in the front staring at the windshield until my husband quietly passed me a napkin. Because apparently even neutral encounters can wring you out when the people across from you once lived inside your entire sense of home. After that first meeting, everybody wanted meaning from me immediately. Not in an aggressive way. More in that awful, hopeful way that makes you feel like a villain for taking your time. My mother sent a thank you email that read like she had revised it 6 times to remove anything too emotional. My father wrote that seeing our daughter had made him realize how much life they had missed. Which, yes, obviously. My brother did not mention the meeting at all. That was probably the smartest thing he did that year. The problem with letting estranged family back in even a crack is that they bring old weather with them. I started having stress dreams again. Not dramatic nightmares, just banal. Exhausting ones where I'd be trying to get somewhere important while my childhood house kept adding hallways. I got snappy at work. I cried when the grocery store was out of the pasta shape our daughter liked. I picked a stupid fight with my husband over whether he had forgotten to mail a utility payment. And halfway through, I realized I didn't care about the bill at all. I cared that contact with my family made me feel porous, and I hated it. So I pulled back. Fewer replies. More time between visits. There were only 2 more in the next couple of months. Both in public, both short. My parents behaved. Which sounds like a low bar, because it is. But consistency after harm matters in humiliatingly basic ways. My mother stopped fishing for affection and started answering simple questions honestly when I asked them. My father quit explaining himself quite so much and started listening longer. Again, low bar. Still notable. My brother tried to reach out a few times after that. Brief messages, careful wording. I kept it minimal. Eventually, he wrote that he understood if being around him complicated my ability to see our parents separately. That was considerate in a way I never would have predicted. When I got home that night, my daughter was asleep with one sock on and her rabbit under her chin, and my husband was half watching some ridiculous home renovation show. He muted the television and asked, "How bad?" I sat down on the couch and said, "Annoyingly human." He laughed, then pulled me in. That phrase became my shorthand for the whole thing after that. Because monsters are easier. Human beings who did terrible things for human reasons are much harder to sort. Winter came, and with it the weird, slow work of deciding what not to carry anymore. That sounds suspiciously wise, so let me make it uglier. I was still angry. I still had moments where a random memory of my mother not showing up, or my father calling my brother solid, would send me into a silent rage while folding tiny shirts. But the anger was changing temperature. Less wildfire, more coals. Easier to hold without burning down my whole day. My parents kept going to therapy. I know because they told me, but also because their behavior had started to lose that frantic, forgiveness-hunting quality. My mother no longer treated every response from me like a miracle. My father started asking if a time worked for a call instead of assuming. They learned, slowly, that guilt is not the same thing as accountability. Guilt wants immediate relief. Accountability is willing to remain uncomfortable. One evening, my mother and I talked on the phone for almost an hour while I chopped vegetables for dinner. Very glamorous reconciliation setting. She told me things about her childhood I had never heard. Not as an excuse. More like context she had avoided all her life because context risks self-awareness. She said being overlooked in her own family had made her cling to whichever child seemed easiest to keep close, and my brother had always played closeness like an instrument. I asked why that didn't make her protect me more. She got quiet and said because I seemed like I would survive. That sentence still makes me want to throw a fork. The children who seem like they'll survive are still children, but at least she said it plainly. My father's progress was less emotional and, annoyingly, maybe more useful. He started naming specific moments. Dinner table interruptions, school events missed. The way he praised my brother publicly and me privately, if at all, because he thought public praise would make me arrogant and my brother motivated. That bizarre little management strategy had apparently governed our household for years. He said it out loud and then said, "It sounds insane when I hear myself say it." Correct. The most difficult decision was whether to let my parents spend any time with our daughter without me glued to the room. My answer stayed no for a long time. Not because I thought they'd hurt her, More because I didn't trust old family gravity. I didn't want her watching me shrink in their presence and learning that as normal. Eventually, after enough steady months and enough conversations with my husband, I agreed to something tiny. They could come to a school spring fair where there would be crowds, noise, exits, and exactly 0 chances for emotional monologues. They showed up early, brought no gifts, followed every boundary. My daughter let my mother help with a beanbag toss and then immediately wandered off because children are little dictators of emotional pacing. My father bought lemonade for everyone and did not try to turn it into symbolism. We lasted an hour and a half. Afterward, I sat in my car and realized I had spent only part of that time on alert. The rest I had spent watching my child laugh. That felt significant, though not redemptive. Don't get carried away. What surprised me most was that my brother stayed away unless invited. No dramatic appearances. No pushing. He sent a message through email once saying he understood if being around him complicated my ability to see our parents separately. That was considerate in a way I never would have predicted. Infuriatingly mature. Apparently, disaster plus therapy can sometimes produce growth, which is rude but true. By spring, contact with my parents had become something I chose case by case instead of something that happened to me. That distinction mattered more than I expected. There was no magical point where I woke up healed. No swelling music, no holiday movie ending where everyone understands each other while passing mashed potatoes. Mostly there were texts, awkward visits, long pauses, occasional honesty, and the constant need to decide what was mine to reopen and what was mine to leave closed. My brother and I remained the least resolved. Sometimes months passed without contact. Sometimes he sent a brief update about his health or therapy, and I answered with one sentence because one sentence was what I had. I did not invite him into our daughter's life right away. I needed space to understand whether I was withholding out of wisdom or just maintaining the family pattern in reverse. Eventually, after 1 full year of him not pushing, not manipulating, not triangulating through our parents, I agreed to meet him at a park while our daughter played nearby with my husband. It was awkward. Of course it was. He brought nothing but himself, which was smart. He asked our daughter about the slide. She ignored him in favor of explaining a bug she had found in the grass. He listened. No performance. No attempt to become beloved in 10 minutes. I watched him struggle not to overcompensate and, against all reason, respected it. Later he apologized again, but differently this time. Not for being caught. Not for the consequences. For selecting me as the place where his fear would land because I had always been expected to absorb what the family did not want to deal with. That apology mattered more because it named the architecture, not just the event. Do I forgive him? I don't know. People treat forgiveness like a switch you flip to prove your character. I think it's more like weathering. Some days the old anger barely registers. Some days I remember the unopened baby photo and have to put my phone down before I say something venomous. What I do know is that I stopped organizing my inner life around the question of whether they deserved another chance. That question kept me trapped in their orbit. The better question became what kind of contact lets me remain myself. My parents never got the family reset they probably wanted. There are no spontaneous drop-ins, no assumption that holidays belong to them. If they want to see us, they ask. Sometimes I say yes. Sometimes I don't. My mother has learned not to cry as a strategy, or at least not in front of me. My father has learned to apologize without appending a justification. Both of those developments took an embarrassingly long time, but there they are. And me? I'm still a woman who can make good decisions in a trauma room, and terrible ones when I'm tired and emotional at home. I still overthink texts. I still have days where my daughter's casual questions about family knock the wind out of me. I still get sarcastic when I'm hurt, and I still sometimes want the impossible version of repair, where the past becomes small enough to step over. That version does not exist. What exists is boundaries, repetition, memory, and the very unglamorous work of not handing old wounds the steering wheel. A few weeks ago, my daughter had to make another family tree for school. She sat at the kitchen table with markers spread everywhere, narrating every branch like a tiny project manager. She asked if she should add my parents. I froze for half a second, then said, "You can if you want to." She did. Then she added my husband's side. Her neighbors she adores, one teacher, and our elderly babysitter who sneaks her extra crackers. The paper looked crowded and a little chaotic and absolutely right. That might be the closest thing to closure I have. Not reunion, not justice in some dramatic, cinematic sense. Just the fact that the shape of family on my daughter's page was bigger than the people who once tried to define mine. My parents are on it now, yes, but not at the center. My brother is a branch, not the trunk. Nobody gets to build the whole structure around his need anymore. When I think about that younger version of me standing alone in a school gym with that stupid ribbon and that foam board, I don't want to tell her everything turns out fine, because that would be a lie and honestly a little insulting. Everything does not turn out fine. Some things remain damaged, some losses stay losses. But I would tell her this. One day, you stop waiting for them to see you correctly before you start arranging your life around what is real. And once that happens, the story still hurts, but it finally belongs to you. Anyway, that's the mess of it. No neat ending, no inspiring speech. Just me, in my kitchen, after a long shift, telling you the truth while the dishwasher hums and my phone stays face down for once. Which, given where I started, is actually more peace than I ever expected.